The studio lights burned brightly over the debate stage, reflecting off the polished floor and illuminating two sharply contrasting figures seated across from one another. Jessica Tarlev, seasoned commentator and Democratic strategist, leaned forward with a self-assured smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Her reputation was built on sharp arguments and an unmistakable knack for dismantling her opponents with polished ease. Opposite her sat Karoline Leavitt, the rising Republican star whose youth was both her badge of honor and, in critics' eyes, her greatest weakness. At just 25, she had captured national attention for her unapologetic defense of conservative values, often sparring with figures twice her age and refusing to back down. The air was charged with anticipation, as if the audience knew that tonight wouldn't be a polite exchange of policy ideas, but something far more personal. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of expression. The moderator's question had been straightforward: what role does generational leadership play in shaping America's future? But Jessica had seized the moment, her tone dripping with condescension. Karoline, she began, her voice smooth yet laced with sarcasm, politics isn't a student council election. This is the real world. With all due respect, you're barely out of college. Experience matters. And honestly, the idea that someone with your age and limited background should be shaping national policy is, well, let's just say it's ambitious. The audience chuckled, some nodding in agreement, while others shifted uncomfortably. Karoline's jaw tightened, but her eyes burned with the fire of someone who'd heard these doubts her entire career. She didn't lean back. She didn't let the insult slide. Instead, she leaned in, her voice calm but unwavering. Jessica, if youth disqualified someone from making a difference, then the founders themselves, who were in their 20s when they charted America's course, would have been dismissed as amateurs. Leadership isn't about the number of candles on a birthday cake. It's about vision, courage, and the ability to connect with the future, not cling to the past. A hush fell over the studio. Jessica's smirk faltered for the briefest of moments. The clash had just begun. The moderator, sensing the sudden shift in energy, glanced nervously between the two women, but the crowd was riveted. Karoline's words had landed with weight. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't let anger seep in, but the steel in her tone had cut deeper than any shout could have. Jessica, unwilling to lose ground, let out a sharp laugh and tilted her head. "Oh, come on," Jessica said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Comparing yourself to the founding fathers? That's a bit dramatic, don't you think? They lived in a completely different time, and frankly, they were men of extraordinary achievement. With all due respect, you're a 20-something with a few press appearances. That's not the same as writing the Constitution." The audience chuckled again, though this time it was thinner, more hesitant. The smug confidence radiating from Jessica was obvious, but so was her strategy: diminish Karoline, frame her as naive, and play to the stereotype of youth being synonymous with incompetence. Karoline, however, refused to take the bait. She didn't flinch. She leaned closer to the microphone, her eyes steady on Jessica. "Jessica, you call it dramatic. I call it history." The average age of the signers of the Declaration of Independence was just 44. Many were younger than me when they risked their lives for this nation. Youth doesn't mean weakness, it means energy, vision, and the courage to confront what others say can't be done. And if we're talking about achievements, I don't measure mine by airtime. I measure them by the people I've fought for, the voices I've amplified, and the generations who see a future in leadership that doesn't dismiss them as irrelevant. The studio was silent for a moment. Silent, except for the slow ripple of applause building from the back of the audience. Then louder. Stronger. Until it drowned out the nervous chuckles that had filled the air just minutes before. Jessica's smile thinned. The camera caught her shifting in her chair. For the first time, she wasn't entirely in control of the exchange. Jessica adjusted her papers, tapping them lightly against the desk as if to signal she was ready to strike back. She leaned into her microphone, her tone cool but laced with the familiar sharpness of someone who believed the audience would rally behind her authority. "Karoline, I appreciate your passion," Jessica began, "but passion without wisdom can be dangerous. Governing isn't about fiery speeches or symbolic gestures. It's about years of experience, negotiation, and understanding the complexities of global politics. You can't just walk into a room and expect to be taken seriously because you have energy. That's not leadership, it's inexperience dressed up as confidence." Her words hung in the air, and this time the audience didn't laugh. Some nodded in agreement, but others seemed unsettled, as if Jessica's tone had crossed into outright condescension. Karoline didn't look away. She folded her hands on the desk in front of her and let the silence work for her before responding. Her voice came out steady, even a touch softer than before, but sharper for it. "Jessica, let me remind you, America's greatest leaders weren't born with experience, they earned it by stepping up before anyone thought they were ready. If passion without wisdom is dangerous, then complacency without vision is deadly. The problems we face today, skyrocketing costs for families, an insecure border, freedoms under constant attack, aren't being solved by those who boast about decades of experience. In fact, it's that very experience that's gotten us here." The audience broke into applause again, stronger this time. A few people even stood, clapping as Karoline delivered the words with calm conviction. Cameras caught the moment, the young Republican, usually dismissed for her age, flipping the narrative entirely. Jessica shifted uncomfortably, the hint of irritation finally breaking through her polished expression. Karoline had turned what was meant to be a weakness into her most powerful weapon, her youth, her fire, her vision of a future not chained to the past. The battle lines were drawn. And it was clear the night was no longer going the way Jessica had planned. Jessica crossed her legs, her polished smile returning as if to reclaim the upper hand. She leaned back, giving a theatrical sigh before speaking. "You know, Karoline, it's easy to criticize from the sidelines. But when you've actually been in the trenches, when you've had to deal with real policy, real budgets, real consequences, you learn that slogans don't fix problems. You may have the fire of youth, but fire without control only burns everything down. Maybe in 10 or 15 years you'll understand what real responsibility looks like." The jab landed like a knife, drawing a few scattered laughs from her supporters in the audience. Jessica's tone was that of a teacher dismissing an eager but unqualified student. The cameras caught her smirk, certain she had turned the momentum back in her favor. But Karoline wasn't rattled. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Jessica's with an intensity that cut through the smugness. Her voice rang out, calm but resolute. "Jessica, you keep calling me inexperienced, but what you call slogans, I call solutions. While seasoned politicians like you talk about responsibility, families are still crushed under inflation. While you mock my age, young Americans are wondering if they'll ever own a home or feel safe walking in their own neighborhoods. Responsibility isn't measured by how many years you've sat in a studio or walked the halls of Congress, it's measured by whether you've actually made people's lives better. And let's be honest, the so-called experienced leaders haven't done that." The audience erupted in applause, louder now, some rising to their feet. The moderator tried to interject, but the energy was uncontrollable. Karoline had flipped Jessica's insult into an indictment of the entire establishment, and the crowd knew it. Jessica's eyes narrowed. The condescending confidence she had displayed at the start of the debate was beginning to fray. Karoline wasn't playing the role she had been assigned, the naive newcomer. She was rewriting the narrative in real time. The moderator, clearly struggling to regain control of the room, raised his hand. "Ladies, please, let's keep this focused on policy." But neither Jessica nor Karoline seemed willing to yield. The air in the studio was electric, the audience on the edge of their seats, sensing something bigger than politics was unfolding. Jessica straightened in her chair, her voice sharper now, her tone losing the polished calm she had carried earlier. "Karoline, you keep talking about the failures of so-called experienced leaders, but without those leaders, without people like me, who actually know how Washington works, you wouldn't have the platform you're standing on today. You're a beneficiary of the very system you criticize." The jab landed with precision, and a section of the audience clapped. Jessica leaned back, satisfied, convinced she had boxed Karoline into a corner. But Karoline didn't miss a beat. She leaned forward, her voice steady, her words deliberate. "You're right, Jessica. I do benefit from the system, but I also see how broken it is. And that's the difference between us. You defend it because it gives you power. I challenge it because it fails the people. You say you know how Washington works. Well, so do Americans, and they know it doesn't work for them anymore. That's why they're turning to leaders who don't just play the game, but change it." The applause exploded like thunder. People rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. The moderator's voice was drowned out as the camera zoomed in on Karoline's calm but fiery expression. She wasn't just defending herself anymore, she was attacking the very foundation Jessica was standing on. Jessica's face tightened, her smirk replaced by a strained smile. For the first time all night, she looked less like the confident commentator and more like someone on the defensive. It was becoming clear, the inexperienced newcomer had taken control of the debate, leaving the seasoned voice scrambling to regain ground. The moderator finally managed to quiet the audience, though the energy still buzzed in the air like static before a storm. Jessica leaned into her mic again, her voice tinged with frustration. "Karoline, what you're offering isn't change, it's chaos. You think tearing down institutions will magically fix problems? That's not leadership, that's recklessness. People want stability, not slogans from someone who hasn't even proven she can navigate the complexities of government." Her words were sharper now, more personal. Jessica's voice carried less polish, more edge, as if she was determined to push Karoline into a corner. Karoline sat still for a moment, letting Jessica's words echo in the silence. Then, with a calm smile, she responded. "Jessica, you keep calling me reckless, but what's truly reckless is pretending that the old way still works. People aren't asking for more bureaucracy. They're asking for results. They don't want polished speeches from commentators, they want leaders who understand what it's like to worry about paying rent, buying groceries, or keeping their communities safe. If that's chaos to you, maybe that says more about how out of touch Washington and its defenders have become." The room exploded again, cheers and applause drowning out the moderator. The camera zoomed in on Jessica's face, her smirk had slipped entirely now, replaced with visible irritation. For the first time, she looked less like the confident debater and more like someone fighting to regain footing in a battle she hadn't expected to lose. Karoline leaned back slightly, her confidence radiating without arrogance. The contrast between the two women was striking, Jessica's years of experience and polish against Karoline's youthful conviction and authenticity. And in that moment, it was clear, the audience was no longer questioning Karoline's youth. They were rallying behind her fire. Jessica adjusted her microphone, her voice cutting through the applause with a hint of irritation she could no longer conceal. "Karoline, let's be honest. You talk a big game, but passion isn't policy. Governing takes discipline, negotiation, compromise. These are things you can't learn from a few campaign rallies or fiery soundbites. You might win applause here tonight, but applause doesn't balance a budget, secure the border, or manage a crisis. The people deserve someone who's serious, not someone playing at politics." It was meant to sting, a carefully sharpened blade aimed directly at Karoline's credibility. Jessica's allies in the audience clapped, their approval echoing briefly before fading into tension. Karoline waited, her expression calm but unwavering, her silence amplifying the weight of her next words. She leaned forward, her voice clear and measured. "Jessica, you confuse compromise with surrender. That's what Washington has been doing for decades, surrendering the people's interests for the sake of backroom deals and keeping power. You call me unserious because I don't play by those old rules. But let's ask the people watching tonight, have those rules worked for you? Has the discipline of Washington made your life better? Or has it left you with higher prices, weaker borders, and leaders who mock you while they collect their paychecks? The studio erupted again, the crowd's roar drowning out everything else. Even the moderator threw up his hands, unable to contain the energy. The camera zoomed in on Karoline's steady gaze, her calm contrasted sharply with Jessica's tightening jaw. For a moment, Jessica had no rebuttal. Her silence, however brief, was deafening. Karoline had taken the older woman's dismissal and flipped it into a scathing indictment of an entire political class. And as the audience thundered in support, it was becoming undeniable, Karoline wasn't the student in this debate anymore, she was teaching the lesson. Jessica finally leaned forward, her tone shifting from calm to defensive, almost pleading with the audience to see her side. Karoline, this isn't a classroom exercise. The issues we're facing, immigration, inflation, foreign policy, require serious hands on the wheel. You don't win those fights with clever comebacks or applause lines. You win them with experience. And whether you want to admit it or not, experience matters. People need steady leadership, not fiery rhetoric. Her words echoed across the studio, but the applause was muted. The audience had grown wary of the repeated appeals to experience. Jessica's face betrayed a flicker of doubt, as if she realized the crowd wasn't buying it anymore. Karoline, on the other hand, seized the silence like a seasoned fighter sensing an opening. She leaned forward, her voice cutting through the tension like steel. Jessica, you keep saying the word experience like it's a badge of honor. But experience in failure is nothing to brag about. Americans are tired of leaders who boast about decades in power but leave us with higher debt, weaker borders, and broken promises. If that's the experience you're defending, maybe it's time for something new. Maybe it's time for someone who hasn't been corrupted by that system to finally challenge it. The eruption of applause was immediate and overwhelming. People stood, clapping and cheering, their energy so loud the moderator's voice couldn't even cut through. The camera caught faces in the crowd, young, old, working class, professional, all united in the raw electricity of the moment. Jessica tried to interject, but her words were drowned out. She sat back in her chair, her polished poise slipping into visible frustration. Her smirk was gone, replaced with a look that could only be described as disbelief. And Karoline? She didn't raise her voice, didn't gloat. She simply sat with quiet confidence, as if the point had been proven without her needing to push further. The tension in the studio was thick now. The audience had firmly shifted, their energy leaning toward Karoline, and Jessica knew it. Still, she wasn't ready to back down. She leaned into the microphone, her voice louder, sharper, almost desperate to reclaim control. You can attack Washington all you want, Karoline, but slogans won't protect this country. When a crisis hits, when foreign leaders test us, when markets collapse, it's not fiery speeches that hold the line. It's knowledge, alliances, and yes, experience. Without it, you risk putting this nation in danger. Jessica's words hung heavy, appealing to fear and responsibility. A small cluster of her supporters clapped, but their voices were drowned quickly in the restless murmurs of the larger crowd. Karoline waited. She didn't rush to reply. Instead, she let the silence amplify the contrast between Jessica's heated tone and her own composure. Finally, she spoke, her voice calm but unyielding. Jessica, you're right about one thing, crises do test leaders. But let's be honest, it was experienced leaders who got us into endless wars, who allowed inflation to skyrocket, and who left our borders vulnerable. If that's the kind of safety Washington's experience buys, the American people can't afford it anymore. Real safety comes from leaders with courage, not leaders clinging to power. The crowd erupted again, this time louder than ever before. The applause rolled like thunder, echoing through the studio. People were on their feet, some chanting Karoline's name, others shouting, "That's right." The camera zoomed in on Jessica, whose face had hardened, her jaw tight, her eyes flashing frustration she could no longer mask. Karoline didn't smirk, didn't gloat, her confidence came not from tearing Jessica down, but from standing firmly for her own vision. And that quiet power made her words resonate even more. It was clear now, the debate had shifted completely. Jessica's attempts to diminish Karoline's youth had backfired. The energy of the room no longer questioned if Karoline was ready, it was demanding she be heard. The moderator finally stepped in, trying to cool the storm that had overtaken the debate. "Ladies, let's stay focused on the issues. One final question: what makes you certain that your vision is the right one for America's future?" Jessica jumped at the opportunity, her voice sharpened with urgency. "I've spent years studying policy, negotiating legislation, working with experts across the globe. That's what leadership is: depth, knowledge, preparation. We can't risk the future of this country on someone who thinks conviction alone will solve problems. America needs stability, not experiments." Her words landed with precision, but they didn't ignite the audience. The applause was polite, restrained, more out of courtesy than conviction. Then Karoline leaned into her mic, her voice steady, her tone carrying the weight of the moment. "Jessica talks about stability. But stability without progress is stagnation. The American people don't want politicians who keep the ship floating in circles, they want leaders who actually move it forward. I may be younger, but that means I see the world not through the lens of decades of compromise, but with urgency, with clarity. My vision isn't built on theory, it's built on the everyday struggles of families who can't afford groceries, who feel unsafe in their neighborhoods, who feel ignored by the very system Jessica defends. The difference between us is simple. She's fighting to protect Washington. I'm fighting to protect you." The studio erupted into chaos. Applause, chants, and cheers rattled the walls, drowning out the moderator's attempt to close the debate. Jessica sat stiffly, her eyes fixed on Karoline, frustration and disbelief written across her face. As the camera zoomed in for the final shot, the contrast was unmistakable: Jessica, the veteran trying to defend the old ways, and Karoline, the young challenger who had turned dismissal into dominance. And in that moment, one truth was clear: what began as Jessica's attempt to humiliate Karoline had ended with the younger woman commanding the room, her calm words echoing like a victory bell.